Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. Today is a big day, a day that represents an inflection point for the city and for police community relations. If you followed my business career or time in the mayor's office, you know I'm a big believer in audits as a way to guide improvement. Audits involve taking an unflinching, comprehensive look at what's working well and what we can do better. And one of the things we recognized in 2020 was that kind of review of Lmpd was long overdue. Today, we're sharing the findings of the Hillard Heintze audit, a top-to-bottom independent review of Lmpd, its policies, practices, and procedures. Hillard Heintze has helped dozens of public safety and law enforcement agencies at all levels of government and is among our nation's leading public safety consulting firms. So I want to thank them for their work on this very thorough review and welcome their representative, Rob Davis, on the call with us in a few moments. You will hear a summary of the report's findings directly from Rob, and we're putting the entire 150-plus page report up on our website today. It's important to note that one of the things we've heard from Hillard Heintze is that our city is not alone. Policing is at a crossroads in America, and many cities are asking how they can improve police community effectiveness. But of course, my focus is on our city, and this report shows us we have much work to do. I'm pleased to say the report found Lmpd to be in line with national best practices in many areas, including its de-escalation training and use of force continuum. And the report highlighted the Synergy Project, which brings community stakeholders and Lmpd together for frank conversations about race as a promising program. As I said, though, the nature of an audit is to expose gaps, and this audit clearly underscores the pain in our community as a whole and within Lmpd. It validates the uncomfortable truth that many people of color in our city do not trust the police due to what the report describes as, quote, generations of problematic relations, unquote. And it points out troubling disparities in arrest numbers and areas of inconsistency in training and leadership. At the same time, the report echoes what many police officers have told me, that morale is low and they're unsure they want to continue in their job. Some of the findings, frankly, can be hard to take, but the nature of an audit, I want to emphasize this, is to expose gaps so that we can address them. That's what we want. Denial is not a strategy. And the report's authors are optimistic that our challenges can be resolved and that transformation is possible with, as they say, a, quote, renewed commitment, unquote, and holistic follow-through from Lmpd and city leaders. And importantly, the community's openness to the department demonstrating a willingness to improve. We should never underestimate our community's willingness to come together to work on big projects. We've seen that time and again, and I am really grateful for this strength. I'm optimistic too, because despite critical findings, this report outlines a roadmap to the goals I've stated over and over, rebuilding Lmpd's relationship with the community and increasing public trust, while also improving morale, training, and pride in the job throughout the police department. All of this as we pursue the goal of having the very best police department in the country. We should settle for nothing less. The bottom line, change is necessary, and I believe welcomed by both the police department and the broader community. It's also important to recognize, as this report does, that we have already made a number of substantive changes over the past few months. Specifically, I signed Breonna's law to ban no-knock warrants and mandate use of body cameras for officers serving search warrants. We've created a Civilian Police Review Board, an Office of Inspector General, to add a new layer of independent review to LMP disciplinary matters, and we're working to change state law to bolster this new system with subpoena power. We're encouraging officers to volunteer in the neighborhoods they serve, and we established a housing credit program to incentivize officers to live within a qualified census tract. We're committed to establishing a system to have the best first responder on each call, whether it's a social worker or a police officer. And after a national search, we have a new police chief, Erica Shields, who is committed to acting on these recommendations for reform and building trust, both in the police department and in the community. We took the steps I listed here and many others after listening and getting more feedback from you, to individuals, to activists, business leaders, faith leaders, and law enforcement. Hillard Heintze has also been listening. Chief Hess will say more about this in a moment, but I'm extremely pleased with efforts they made to hear directly from the people of Louisville, from Metro Council, from organizations and individuals representing our diverse city, and from Lmpd. They surveyed the public and got nearly 8,000 responses. They created a special email address for more community input, and they made on-site visits where they conducted interviews, observed training, and participated in ride-alongs with police officers. It was important to us that the opinions and needs of the community, police, and partners were a part of this process, because we believe strongly that public safety is something we co-produced. We must team up because only then will it be seen as legitimate. Public safety is something we do together, not one party doing something to another. It's also important that the community holds us accountable to the findings of this audit and receives regular reports on our progress. Chief Hess and Chief Shields are committed to doing this. So again, thank you to Hillard Heintze and to all those who shared your experiences for this report. Now, Amy Hess, our Chief of Public Safety, will provide a little more detail about the process that led to this report, and then we will hear directly from Hillard Heintze. Chief Hess.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon. I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about the review process and how we got here. And after that, I'll turn it over to Rob Davis from Hillard Heintze to tell you about the analysis itself, their conclusions and recommendations. On June 2nd, we issued a request for proposal, or RFP, for a top-to-bottom review of the Louisville Metro Police Department's policies, procedures, and operations, and to provide recommendations for implementation. That report, as stated in the RFP, when final, would be made available to the public. 14 vendors submitted a response by the deadline of June 16th, and 10 were deemed responsive to the RFP. A review panel was convened, including Jackie Banks-Lewis, who facilitated from our Office of Management and Budget, myself for Public Safety, Kendall Boyd, our Chief Equity Officer, May Porter, our Internal Auditor, and Metro Council President David James. The evaluation criteria that we used included looking at the proposal's qualifications and experience of the vendor, the technical aspects of the proposal, and the cost. The panel independently rated the vendors' proposals, and I've got to say that the quality of the top 3 submissions and the experience of those vendors were particularly impressive. But Hillard Heintze, a Jensen Hughes company based in Chicago, was the clear winner. Since 2004, Hillard Heintze has helped drive the critical advancements in policing called for in the 2015 final report of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing: transparency, accountability, and better community engagement. The panel's review of Hillard Heintze's proposal and subsequent interview, we noted their outstanding experience, their qualifications, multiple examples which are directly relevant to the review. They had a well-written and thorough work plan and a diverse team which emphasized expediency. On July 2nd, we publicly announced the contract award, and on August 3rd, a statement of work was finalized and executed. Now, as stated in that statement of work and in the proposal, the review would include basically 2 types of work. To conduct this comprehensive review, first they were going to look at the data specifically surrounding traffic stops, investigative stops, and arrests. In addition to that, the second part of the review would be assessments, looking at Lmpd's policies, procedures, and protocols, and comparing those with best or emerging practices for progressive law enforcement agencies around the country. Specifically, they were to examine operational areas for Lmpd, such as use of force, the planning and service of search warrants and arrest warrants, crowd control policies, protocols for handling complaints against Lmpd personnel, community-oriented policing, strategies and associated training, recruiting, testing, hiring, and promoting personnel, de-escalation policies, tactics, and training, crisis intervention, bias-free policing, and procedural justice policies and associated training. On August 6th, we had a kickoff meeting that was held with the mayor, Lmpd command staff, a few members of Metro Council, and the Hillard Heintze team. Now, as I said, the review panel was particularly impressed with the composition of the Hillard Heintze team. It was led by Robert Davis, Senior Vice President with Hillard Heintze. Rob is a highly regarded leader in policing and public safety, having previously served as Chief of the San Jose Police Department and President of the Major Cities Chiefs Association. Rob oversaw all aspects of this review, and you'll be hearing from him momentarily. Marcia Thompson is a vice president with Hillard Heintze. She's also an attorney with over 20 years working in the criminal justice field with a focus in civil rights and community engagement. Bob Bomer is another vice president with Hillard Heintze. He was a Chicago police officer prior to earning his law degree and becoming a legal advisor for the city of Chicago, and then general counsel, chief of staff for the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority. Together, Marcia and Bob served as the project leads. And Dr. Alexander Weiss, he performed the data analysis. Dr. Weiss is a nationally recognized expert and specialist in public safety, law enforcement, and police department operational analysis. I will let Rob introduce the rest of the Hillard Heintze team in a few minutes. But I also want to take a moment to recognize Lisa Jarrett, who served as the project coordinator for Louisville Metro government. Lisa holds a law degree from University of Louisville and worked at the Commonwealth Attorney's Office for about 10 years before she joined the City Law Department, which was merged into the Jefferson County Attorney's Office, and she retired from there in 2018 as the Division Chief of Litigation after nearly 30 years of service. And based on her considerable skills and experience, we coaxed her out of retirement, and I've got to say that Lisa was critical in facilitating this review, ensuring that Hillard Heintze had access to everything and everyone they needed, arranging interviews, logistics, locating and providing materials and data, and spending countless hours reviewing the many sections of the report. Lisa, I can't thank you enough for your time and dedication to this project and your years of public service to help our city continuously improve and move forward. Throughout this review, Metro government and Hillard Heintze both placed a premium on community involvement. The team made 2 on-site visits to Louisville. They visited the Lmpd's training academy, the firing range, professional standards unit, the public integrity unit, and other locations. They conducted more than 100 individual and group interviews, both virtually and in person. This included representatives from the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, County Attorney's Office, Public Defender's Office, Metro Council, members of Lmpd, both sworn and civilian at all levels, and they also met with representatives of community organizations like the International Community, Faith Community, the NAACP, Cities United, ACLU, Black Chamber of Commerce, Kentucky Alliance, Black Media, Universal Partners, Feed Louisville, Synergy, and the Impetus Group, among others. An information session was held virtually on October 10th for anyone and everyone who wanted to learn more about the review. And as far as the surveys go that the mayor mentioned, Hillard Heintze launched 2 anonymous surveys which were posted online from October 16th through the 27th. And a telephone option was available for those who could not access the internet. One survey was geared toward community members, the other specific to Lmpd employees, because it was essential to get thoughtful, candid feedback from both groups because their perspectives would inform the analysis, recommendations, and the actions to be taken based on those recommendations. There were 7,805 community responses and 508 responses from Lmpd. That represented 78% of sworn officers and 22% unsworn. Additionally, we shared the input we had collected through the police chief search process, which was happening about the same time. That was more than 10,000 survey responses from both the public and Lmpd, and 21 listening sessions with 126 different participants. Further, Hillard Heintze established an email address, which was publicized for residents to contact them, and almost 300 people took advantage of that opportunity. And while all that was happening, Hillard Heintze was collecting and reviewing volumes of data and documents, things like standard operating procedures, demographic data, annual budget reports, collective bargaining agreements, training manuals, recruiting materials, and more. On December 18th, we received the first draft of the report. And as outlined in the statement of work, the draft was provided to the mayor's office for technical feedback or content accuracy or clarity that would necessitate any appropriate edits to the document to create the final assessment report. Now, several members of Lmpd's command staff and the mayor's office met with Hillard Heintze to discuss that report on 3 different occasions earlier this month. In high-quality, comprehensive audits and inspections, as I know from my own experience leading such reviews, this part of the process is commonly referred to as a factual accuracy review. The intent is to allow the entity being reviewed to identify any factual inaccuracies or misstatements, to suggest clarifying language and provide supporting materials and data which the reviewer might not have seen. The purpose is not to influence or change the outcome, the conclusions, or recommendations just because they are critical or unfavorable. Our review and discussion included correcting typographical errors, identifying the correct version of policies being referenced, and providing clarifying language to better describe practices or protocols. But I think it's important to note that the report's overall analysis and conclusions were not changed as a result of this review. I can say on behalf of all who participated in this process that we appreciated the thorough, fair, and thoughtful analysis by the Hillard Heintze team. And as you will see in the report, they recognized and highlighted the department's strengths, but also identified many areas for improvement. There are 102 recommendations in this 155-page report. We recognize and appreciate the need for change, the need to continuously improve, and we want to thank the Hillard Heintze team for providing us with this blueprint to move our city and our police department forward. And at this time, I'd now like to turn it over to Rob Davis to describe the analysis and conclusions in more depth.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me all right? I'd like to begin also by thanking Mayor Fisher, members of the Metro Council, Chief Amy Hess, Lisa Jarrett, Chief Shields, and the rank and file members of the Louisville Metro Police Department, and most importantly, the Louisville Metro community members for their willingness to participate in our assessment activities. We ran into no resistance. It was very clear to us coming into this project that people wanted change. They wanted us to identify where there were weaknesses in the operations of Lmpd as well as the strengths, but also ways that the community would be able to collaborate with the department in the future to make things better. We recognize that this is a watershed moment for law enforcement across the country, that any number of efforts are underway right now to try and make the police departments a type of police department that the community members are looking forward to have in their community, providing policing services, but also the type of a police department where officers and other members of that department want to work. The overwhelming majority of people, both within the department and within the community, want the same thing. They want Louisville to be a safe, enjoyable place to live, work, play, go to school, whatever the case may be. So we were very appreciative of that effort. I also appreciate the comments of both the mayor and Chief Hess in terms of what they wanted out of this assessment. And in fact, I would like to point out that when the RFP, or the request for proposals, was put out, one of the things that attracted us as a firm to want to be involved in this is that it was very evident to us that Louisville was not asking for some cookie cutter approach to this analysis, nor are they looking for somebody to come in and just do a superficial scan of the environment for the operations or at the PD. They were serious about wanting a top to bottom assessment. And I say this for the following reason. You already heard Chief outline the major topics that we were assessing. And in fact, in the reports, you will find that there are several chapters that basically could have headlines. They have the headlines of what she's just outlined. But the things that they asked for in that RFP and the things that we assessed are what we consider to be the key benchmarks that we look for no matter what city we go into to determine how well they're doing. It's almost like, think of it this way. When a person goes to a doctor's office for a checkup, there are some key questions that are going to be asked. There's some key data points that the doctors are automatically going to ask. They're going to ask you, how tall are you? How much do you weigh? What's your blood pressure? What medications are you taking? What symptoms do you have? They're going to ask basic questions that are the benchmark questions that are helping them understand what is the health of this patient. And when you talk about police work and doing an assessment or an audit of a police department, when you think of things like use of force, de-escalation techniques, how you're serving search warrants, how do you handle crowd control, how do you handle complaints against your personnel, what are you doing in terms of your community policing philosophy? Is that philosophy spread throughout the department? When you ask questions about the recruiting and hiring processes and the diversity within an agency, or promotional processes, or how they're handling crisis intervention, all the things that Chief Hess mentioned, those are the key benchmarks. That's our triage process. So when we saw that RFP and realized that that's what the city was asking for, we realized that they were serious, about affecting change where it was identified. And so that's what we did. We collected, as Amy has mentioned, Chief Hess has mentioned, a very diverse group of individuals, and you'll get more bios and backgrounds of them within the report, so you can see who helped us on this. But a very diverse team who were either on the ground or assisting in the virtual site visit and or reviewing materials for us that we were collecting from the agency to give us the feedback on what we saw as our key findings. So the report is basically, as Chief Hess mentioned, 155 pages. It is comprised of chapters, and in each chapter, you will find one of these major topics covered, and we provide key findings and key recommendations that address that chapter. So we realize, in the interest of time here and the fact that the report is just being released, it's a little bit difficult to speak to that until you've had a chance to digest it. I'll give you some highlights, some key highlights of some of the things that we found. I'll be doing some of this, and I'll call upon my colleague, Dr. Weiss, to also provide some details about some of the things he found in his analysis. But one thing that I'll share with you is that at the very, very top, it was very clear, and the mayor and others have already stated it, that community trust is a major issue in Louisville. We heard this in the surveys. We heard it in our interviews. We heard it during the focus groups. We heard it in the emails. We saw in the emails we had. It's very clear that there's an issue that department needs to address in terms of how it interacts with the community, how people are being treated, how they're explaining their actions. Also, to the degree that the department is bringing the community in to help determine what those policies and procedures will look like based upon community wants, desires, and needs. So first and foremost, you'll see that theme bleeding throughout all of the sections of our report, that there needs to be improvement in that area. Understand also, when we started to do the assessment, we see ourselves as a third-party, neutral, objective group coming in to take a look at those benchmarks. And we see ourselves also, if you will, as professional baseball umpires. We call balls, we call strikes. We say it like it is because we figure if we try and tone something down, there's no value to that. If we don't highlight what's gone well, that's also not fair. So I hope that you'll see in this report that we're really striving to be objective in the things that we called out. So I'll share some of the things we saw that were what you consider challenges, as well as some of the things we think that they're doing well. I've already mentioned community trust as being a major issue. However, we also realize that department morale within the LMPD is extremely low. One data point for you is that in the survey we did internally within LMPD, 75% of the respondents told us that if they had the chance to leave the department and move to another agency, they would do so. That's very, very troubling. Now, I know that we're in a time when police departments across the country are being challenged with these same issues as a result of many, many tragedies and other things that have happened in the policing world and in our communities over the last several years and even beyond. But that's a high number, 75%, and that's going to be a challenge, and they're going to have to address that. LMPD leadership also needs to improve its communications up and down the chain of command. A well-functioning agency, you see where a chief, you will see a chief that has a real good handle on what the mission, the value statement of that agency is, and how they want to try and operate their policing within a community. And they share that philosophy, that mission, and those values up and down the chain with open communication. If a new policy comes out, they share that down the rank and file. When I say chain of command, I mean, a chief is sharing it with an assistant chief, with a deputy chief, with all the way down to a sergeant and an officer on the street, as well as the non-sworn personnel. That has not necessarily been happening over the last several years, and we heard that from the surveys of the officers, even not just the officers, but the leaders within the organization. That's been an issue. There also has been a way for those officers to communicate up the chain of command what some of their concerns are. The leadership there really needs to take a look at how they're communicating within the agency to make sure that the policies, procedures, operations, and protocols that they're advocating or teaching these officers and others to do are being followed, and that they understand why. And also to the extent that they're bringing the community in so that they can co-produce some of those policies, if you will, and participate in what those directions will be or the directives given to the officers. I should also point out that another major thing we found is that recruiting and retention is also an issue there. And this is a problem that's being shared across the country. Given the climate in Louisville right now, one can understand why there may be many of the younger generation who are saying, why would I want to go into policing? And so that's going to be a challenge there and elsewhere. But we will say this, and obviously I'm speaking perhaps from a little bit of a biased position. We recognize that policing done well can truly be a catalyst for cultural change, social change, and other positive things in any community across this country. So the need to try and challenge our younger generations to understand how policing could be done, how it should be done, co-producing it with the community, working hand in hand is something that's important. And they need to make sure that message continues to go out to entice people to come and work in Louisville, which happens to be a great community, as you already know. LMPD also, as kind of a corollary, is experiencing a high level of attrition within those supervisors' ranks. Well, actually, officers and sergeants and lieutenants' ranks. At times, that's actually led to a situation where there have been acting sergeants in the field who are simply patrol officers that have been tasked to do that because there hasn't been a sergeant available in any given time. And a lot of these folks have not received necessarily supervisory training to do those jobs. And that's an issue that needs to be addressed by the LMPD. Now, I've shared already a few of the things that are concerns for us, but I should also highlight and be very clear about this, that there are many things that are also going well within LMPD. In fact, LMPD for the last few years has been a national leader in training its officers in a program or an approach to policing that's called ICAT, and that stands for Integrating Communications, Assessment, and Tactics in the Process of Using Force. And the report spells this out a little bit more with the details. But suffice it to say that because LMPD took the lead and became one of the first departments in the country to do that, we found, as we were doing our data assessment, that between 2018 and 2020, LMPD experienced a 28% reduction in use of force. They experienced a 26.3% reduction in injuries to members of the public, and they experienced a 36% reduction in injuries to LMPD personnel. This is great. And in fact, any number of agencies, even those that are considered high-performing, progressive agencies, have not yet experienced those types of statistics, which indicates that there are things at LMPD that are going well. We did find, however, one other data point is that the search warrant process and the policies that LMPD uses to both create search warrants, seek search warrants, if you will, from the attorney's office, as well as execute those search warrants. They've had some good policies. They've had some good additions to those policies over the last couple of years, but they haven't always necessarily been followed. And there's a need for LMPD membership through an auditing process, not just with the search warrant process, but in all of its operations, to create something that many agencies call a staff inspections unit or an audit unit that routinely, on a regular basis, takes a look at all of the operations of the department, whether it's the robbery unit, the SWAT team, the search warrant groups, patrol officers, administrative units. This needs to occur, as the mayor was stating at the beginning of this press conference, about the fact that it's important to do these audits to make sure that your people are doing what you're expecting them to do or what you think that they are doing. You need to verify that. That's one thing they need to look at when it comes to particularly search warrant process. Another couple of key data points that you'll see in the report is that we found that Black residents of Louisville Metro are more likely to be arrested, but they're no more likely to be subjected to the use of force during those arrests. And there are other important data points we found through some disparities of outcomes as a result of an analysis that was done by Dr. Weiss. And at this time, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Dr. Weiss to kind of highlight some of those data points that he learned in this process. Dr. Weiss.
Thanks very much, Rob. We were tasked with looking at 3 measures of police activity, traffic stops, field interrogations, and arrests. Let me talk briefly about the traffic stops first. Traffic stops are an important measure for police activity and an important measure for police community relations, in part because for many members of the community, it's the only real direct contact we have with a police officer. So the nature of that contact, the motivation for the contact remains quite important. Now, we looked at traffic stop data for 2019. The department maintains 2 traffic stop data files. One is electronic and one is what they call a paper file. The electronic one is much larger. It's about 38,000 stops, and we were able to work extensively with that. What we found was in our analysis is that Black drivers were about 60% more likely to be stopped than one would expect of their presence in the population. Now, this is a finding which always makes people wonder about why. One of the things that police agencies often say is that we deploy police officers to areas where there's lots of activity and lots of crime, and those tend to be areas where the residents are people of color. So thus, if we just put a lot of officers there, at the aggregate level, there's going to be more stops of people of color. In this particular case, we kind of bore down on that assertion and took a harder look. And what we found was something very different. For example, in the 5th Division, where 5% of the division's population is Black, 26% of the traffic stops in that division were for Black drivers. In the 7th Division, 11% of the residents are Black, but 21% of the stops were Black drivers. And in the 8th Division, where 9% of the residents are Black, 20% of the stops were for Black drivers. Coincidentally, in the 1st and 2nd Division, which are predominantly African American, the proportion of stops for Blacks pretty much mirrored the population there. One of the good news about traffic stops is we saw evidence that there was no racial disproportionality in consent searches. This has been a big problem in many, many agencies around the country. Minorities are much more likely to be the subject of a consent search. And in addition, when the officers conduct the searches, they're much more likely to find contraband in vehicles driven by white drivers. So the good news in Louisville is that there is no evidence of racial disproportionality in the consent searches. We looked at field contacts or field interrogations. Officers who have reasonable cause can stop someone, inquire about their name, what they're doing, what activities they're engaged in. Sometimes these involve a pat down for weapons, and they may involve a search. Well, it turns out that 44% of all the field contacts done in Louisville are of Black individuals, and Blacks represent 21% of the population. So once again, the ratio is about 2 to 1 based on the population. But perhaps even more importantly, in Louisville, the department does a good job defining the parameters of these field contacts, but they don't require that officers record the contacts. So officers get to decide whether or not the data is recorded. And there's a risk that, for example, people of color may be overrepresented in the pool of data about field contacts. That can be a problem if, for example, if investigators are using this data as a basis to follow up on investigations. So there's a potential source of bias there. We saw the same kind of data at the division level. For example, in the 5th Division, where 5% of the residents are Black, 22% of the field interviews were for Black individuals. And in the 8th Division, where 9% of the residents are Black, 22% of the field contacts were for Black individuals. Finally, we looked at arrests. There were 116,000 arrests in 2019. That includes 52,000 kind of custodial arrests and 64,000 non-traffic related citations. Once again, the Blacks were 2.1 times more likely to be the subject of an arrest based on what we'd see in the population. So all of these areas, the traffic stops, the field interrogations, and the arrests showed a similar pattern of racial disproportionality. And perhaps most importantly, this is consistent with the data that we learned about from the interviews in the community. People told us about this, what they perceived to be unfair treatment in traffic stops and field contacts. So we were comfortable with this finding, and it's consistent with other data points in the study. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you very much, Dr. Weiss. I'll conclude with just 2 more data points, and then we'll turn the time back over to the Mayor's Office and Chief Hess for questions. But one thing that we think that we also need to highlight for you is to help you understand that the department truly needs to diversify itself. If you take a look at the population of Louisville Metro, it's approximately 26% African American. Yet when you take a look at the department, it's 12.5% African American. And of that percentage within the department, we find that only 6.2% of the personnel, of the African American officers are 6.2% of the sergeants are African American, and 10.3% are lieutenants. So not only are the African Americans of the Black community underrepresented in the population of the department, but also underrepresented within the upper ranks. And that's very clearly something that needs to be addressed in terms of the processes they use to do both hiring as well as promotions. So we've underscored that within the report as well. And the last data point I'll share because recognize there are 155 pages to this report. As Chief S mentioned, we've got 102 recommendations. It would be an extremely lengthy press conference. We would try to hit every single highlight, but understand that these things are spelled out within the report with very specific findings for each topic and very specific recommendations for each topic. But I'll conclude by saying this. In the midst of all the challenges we've just outlined that we identified within the report, one thing also became very clear to us, and that is this. We firmly believe that there are people, and we've met them, we've spoken with them, particularly in some of the upper command staff members we've spoken with, as well as officers themselves in the street. There is a desire within the department to improve, to change some cultural issues, to change policies and procedures, because they themselves want to be recognized by the community as being a top-notch police department. So we found, and we're heartened by that fact, that there is a willingness, a desire within the department to press forward and to become better. They were not resistant to the suggestions we had, the recommendations we made, even in the discussions we were having with them. Some of them themselves shared the very recommendations that we've got within our report. We also are heartened by the fact that you've got a new chief there, Chief Erica Shields, and we know about her work. We know about her approach to policing. We've been speaking with her about what she plans on doing in terms of these recommendations. And we have great faith and confidence that there's a path forward where, based upon our experience working with other cities that have experienced similar types of challenges and problems, and I don't want to embarrass any of them by naming them, but suffice it to say this. Any number of those that we've worked with over the years are now recognized as being model agencies where we literally will take some of our new clients, people from within a department, to those agencies so they can learn how to make the types of changes that Louisville is on a path now to make to improve their department. So while this report may indicate these challenges that have been mentioned, please make no mistake that from our perspective and our interactions with the people with whom we've interacted there in Louisville, there is a path forward. Louisville's a great place to live. It's a great place to work. Louisville can be a great department, and everybody wants that. And from our perspective, the desire and the will is there, and we have every faith and confidence that they can do that. We clearly expect to see in 3, 4, 5 years down the road the latest best practices mentioned that are occurring within Louisville PD. So on that note, I'll conclude our comments and turn it back over to the mayor.
Thanks, Rob. And again, you guys did a great job. We really appreciate it. And you make a really critical point. Is there's people in life that always want to be critical, and they always want to pick at this and pick at that. This isn't the purpose of this audit, right? We were looking for weaknesses. We were looking for gaps, and winning teams and winning people embrace those gaps and work against them. That's what you're going to see from LMPD and the community. Now, one important note about audits. They're no good at all if they just sit on a shelf. Audits are tools that have to be used, and they've got to be put into action. And in this case, our new police chief, Erica Shields, will be leading that action. So let's hear a few words from her. Chief Shields?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to echo a few words of Mayor Fisher's, and that being that policing is at a crossroads in America, and now is the time to choose the right path, a path that will lead this city and indeed our country in a direction that we've needed to be headed for a very long time. Prior to becoming chief at LMPD, I did have several questions I needed answers to, answers that would help guide me as I needed to move the department forward in a fair and ethical manner. Having now had the opportunity to receive and review the Hillard Heintze report, I'm grateful to see that many of the questions that I have had, they also had, and they got us answers. And this is significant because this, for me, is the roadmap. This report is the roadmap for us to move our department forward. There's no sense trying to sugarcoat or gloss over anything. The report spells it out in black and white. We need to improve, and we have a lot of work ahead of us. And while the report does identify deficiencies for sure, it also provided those action items and recommendations that are essential to forward progress. I firmly believe that if we adhere to this report, commit ourselves to it, not only will we become a state-of-the-art, state-of-the-nation police department, but we can also lead in the area of police reform. And as someone who has been a practitioner in law enforcement for 25 years, rest assured, reform is needed across the United States. And I am happy, I am so happy and grateful that this report was undertaken prior to my arrival because it's huge. What's a key thing from the report that I see? That constant communication that is transparent and inclusive of the community will be essential for us to move forward. And to that end, I plan to provide regular updates outlining what we have accomplished that aligns with the report's recommendations. This report documents those measures necessary to restore hope to the communities, particularly those communities that have been marginalized by disparate police practices for generations. With this plan, Breonna's Law, the agreement with the Breonna Taylor family, and the changes already in works, I am confident that collectively as a community, we can make LMPD an agency that we are all proud of. So thank you, and thank you for investing so much time, Chief Davis and Mayor. Thank you for prioritizing this. This is huge. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Also, just want to remind everybody, obviously, this has been all part of a bigger plan. Our police chief search, we started that around the same time as we did this review because we wanted the review to be complete when the new chief came in. So he or she, in this case she, would be able to hit the ground running with the police department and with the community so we could co-produce public safety together. I want to thank Chief Amy Hess for leading this effort for us, the whole audit process. It's been obviously lots of moving parts, but Chief, you did an incredible job throughout the entire process. And I want to thank Lisa Jarrett as well. Lisa, number one, came out of retirement as just an incredible citizen and just had the intelligence and the heart and the love for the community to lead all of us through this process from Hillard Heintze to the local folks in just an unmatched way. So you did a great job. Thank you very much, Lisa Jarrett. All right, before we move to media questions, let me close with this reminder. One, the report obviously shows serious challenges that have got to be addressed with LMPD and with the rest of our community as we co-produce public safety. And you've heard me talk about the co-production of public safety for a couple years now, and you're going to be even hearing more about it. I will tell you, we will address these challenges. But we've got to also keep in mind that LMPD employs about 1,100 police officers sworn to serve and protect about 770,000 people. So that's more than 700 people for every one police officer. So it's clear that reimagining public safety does not just stop with this report, and it just does not stop with police reforms. There has to be broader reform all across the nation, the state, and our city. And by that, I mean, as a society, we too often ask police to address all of society's problems because society has failed to make the necessary investments to address poverty, mental health, domestic violence, substance misuse, and other challenges. And because we failed to face up to the reality of structural racism, which keeps far too many of our neighbors from opportunity, from access, and from hope. So today, beyond the police reform that I guarantee will happen, we must also commit to serious, intentional, and cooperative action on those other bigger societal challenges. They're root causes of violence, inequity. We have to attack those. I've said before, we face a choice today. And it's not about black versus white or demonstrators versus police. It's about the past versus the future. One we can't change and one we will change by working together. We know that America's eyes have been on Louisville for months now. So let's show the nation what we can do. Let's come together and be that American city that takes itself from tragedy to transformation together. Thank you. And we'll now take questions from the media.
The first question is from Mark Vanderhoff of WLKY, and I think this question is for Chief Shields. Is there a timeline for when the administration hopes to see recommendations addressed, and what is the process for measuring that and ensuring this report does not collect dust?
Thank you. No, this report's not collecting dust. I intend to be successful, and this report is the roadmap to success. We are assigning people, working with the mayor's office, who will keep us on task, keep us on point, and that's why there's going to be regular report outs. I'm accountable. I'm accountable not just to my boss, but to the community and the council and giving updates. And so I think the report outs will indicate where we're making progress quickly. Some of the stuff has already been underfoot thanks to Interim Chief Yvette Gentry. She recognized the need to start moving the needle on some of this stuff immediately. But the other things that we've just got to drill down and get to work. We'll be reporting out on it.
Thank you. The second question is from Roberto Ferdman of Vice News, and this question is for Chief Davis from Hillard Heintze. I'm wondering if the review included an examination of the Louisville Metro Police Department's handling of open records requests and broader adherence to Kentucky open records law. If not, why not?
Yes, well, in many ways, the report stresses the fact that transparency is a key issue. And in fact, in some of the sections, one section in particular, you'll find where we express the need for them to discover all the ways that they could be more transparent and actually post information, such as operational information, online at their website. So that's a theme that runs throughout everything in terms of transparency, openness, collaborative operations with the community, et cetera. So it's a theme that runs throughout the report.
Thank you. Chief Shields, this question is from Darcy Costello of the Courier, and she asked, of the recommendations, which to you is the most urgent? Did you find any of the findings alarming?
You know, I think that I can't say that I found them alarming. I think that it was probably in line with what I anticipated, but it obviously is helpful. It's helpful to me to sell my messaging by having the data to support it. I think this is where data is so essential to the audience, the internal audience that may not want to believe that these issues are as pronounced as they are. But I don't think that when I look at Lmpd and how we're moving forward, I'm not triaging as much as I'm saying there has to be so many processes moving simultaneously together. And I think that we have the capacity and the heart to do it. I mean, that has been for me, without question, the one thing that I can't say I anticipated, and I'm thrilled, is the personnel in Lmpd who truly want change and are not resistant to this. And that is huge because it means I don't have to expend exhaustive amounts of energy just convincing people that we're not in the best space. People want to move forward. They want to enjoy their job. They don't want to deal with protests all the time. They want to have pride in what they're doing. And so there's a hunger within this department to be more professionalized and viewed in a better light. So I feel confident that we'll get this done.
This question is also for you, Chief Shields. From Jesse Cohen of WHAS. One of the highlights discussed is the need for more diverse officers within the department and within higher positions. Do you have plans to promote anyone in the near future to bring diversity to Lmpd command?
Right, so that was, I guess if there was one area, back to Darcy's question, that probably I didn't anticipate the level, this being as urgent as it is. When you're appointing individuals to command, you are appointing them out of areas of supervision of leadership that they've tested into. So I'm appointing from the lieutenant rank. I anticipated that my pool of lieutenants would be much more diverse than it is. When you come in, I always contrast it to baseball. You want a strong AAA team, so you have your choice of talent. You can move up to the pros. Where Lmpd is now on diversity, we're at single A level. That's the hiring process. And to me, that is a deficiency that should have been recognized a long time ago by individuals who had the capacity to change it. So that being said, we have an obligation now to get it right. And that means aggressively recruiting a more diverse population of officers. And so there's not a quick turnaround on that, unfortunately, but at this point, it's a matter of, as the mayor said, are you going to keep looking back or are you going to move forward? We're moving forward.
Kalani Koenig, a producer with CBS News. She's asking about the housing credit program that was announced last year and the move to encourage officers to volunteer in the neighborhoods that they serve. She's asking if there's any data or estimation on how many in LMPD have taken advantage of those, either the housing credit or volunteering.
Right, thank you. Yeah, the housing credit program, that was one of the items in the Taylor Settlement Agreement. And that is in place. It is a $5,000 one-time incentive for officers to live in designated census tracts. It is in place, however, to date, we have had no officers yet take advantage of that opportunity, but it's still early.
The next two questions are for Chief Shields. The first one is from Maxwell Mitchell with 502 Live Streamers. He asks, what's the first step for a department where 75% of officers are willing to leave for another agency given the opportunity?
Well, I think obviously that figure was alarming to look at, but then I also realized that these interviews were done in the summer at the height of the protests, and so I do put them into context. That being said, I'm aware that there is a morale issue, and that's incumbent upon me to address. And the first thing for me to do is, and I've been working on diligently, I still have a lot of work to do, is to meet as many of the officers as possible and reassure them that they are valued, that they as human beings matter. Employees, if an employee, regardless of your work site, workplace, doesn't feel that they're valued, then how are they going to perform day in and day out? And if I'm putting folks out on the street who feel as though they are not of value to myself and to the command staff and we don't care about their well-being, then realistically they're probably not going to provide the best customer service, right? And so for me, it's meeting with as many employees as possible, hearing from them, and just providing them the support so that they have the confidence to do the job. I mean, make no mistake, it's easy to assume that, we as cops we're just jerks, but at the end of the day, a lot of times you really find yourself as a police officer feeling vulnerable, and it's my job to make sure these folks understand what they're doing is a noble profession. It does matter. It does matter. It can be enjoyable. And let's get back to that space so you can wake up every day and have pride in putting the uniform on, pride in going out and serving the community. So, it's not going to happen overnight, but it's imperative for us to be successful.
Chief Shields, this
Yeah.
is also for you. A follow-up from Roberto Ferdman of Vice News, who talks about delays that he's had trouble with open records requests and getting responses from LMPD, and he asks if you are planning to review the department's handling of open records requests.
Right. So I'm all big on, the open records, complying with the law, getting stuff in and out. I think that when things fall off on open records, we create issues that we don't need. So I've been working closely with the Public Affairs Department, the Open Records Unit, because we do not need to unnecessarily create issues for ourselves that just are particularly of an administrative nature. So yes, we will be addressing that.
Okay, thank you. There are no more questions. We'll close out.
Okay, again, thanks to Hillard Heintze, thanks to Chief Hess, Lisa Jarrett, everybody involved. I want to thank LMPD for their participation in this, all of our community as well. So if you can't tell, I'm excited about this. This is what I look like when I'm excited, okay? Because we've got a roadmap now to move us forward. So why did we do this? One, we knew that we could do better. And the best way to understand that is to do an audit so that we could figure out what that roadmap looks like. Second is this report identified real challenges for us to get to work with. Yes, within LMPD, but also to bring the community into the public safety dialogue. So we're co-producing public safety together. That to me, like when I close my eyes at night and when I think about what does success look like, it's when I walk into a room of people, and a year and a half, 2 years from now, and people say, Mayor, we are doing it together. And the police and the community look at each other and say, that's right, we understand each other's needs, we're working in tandem to make our community safe. Every grandma in our community has the right to be able to sit on her front porch and feel safe. I want to hear from her to say, Mayor, things have changed. The community's involved, I'm involved, our police officers are involved, we're doing this together. So that's what success looks like, and I'm really gratified that we have a roadmap here to work together and that we have a community that is going to participate in a winning way to make this report happen. Yes, there'll be people that criticize it. Okay, fine. Drop the negative, get on with the positive, help us make our city the most safe city in the country with the best absolute police department in the country. Louisvillians deserve no less than that, and our intent is to deliver on that. So thanks everybody for joining us today.